Welcome to the newest episode of Short is the New Long. Your co-hosts are authors Adam Stump and Greg Krojak.
Thanks for tuning in to Short is the New Long podcast. And perhaps you're wondering who we are and why we're doing this. I can say I've always loved all types of fiction. But when I was younger, I was introduced to the short story. And because of my reading style, I'm a really slow auditory reader. When I discovered short stories, a world of adventure was opened up to me that I could read a lot of stories very quickly. And so over the past 4 years, I've been writing for myself, and I've had over 20 stories published in various genres, including sci-fi, humor, game lit, crime, but also suspense. And so I just have discovered that I love writing and reading short stories and short novels and novellas. And I live near Erie, PA with my wife and my 4 children. And by day, I'm a pastor, and usually by night, about 2 a.m., I'm a keyboard warrior clacking away, typing out short stories as furiously as the muse leads me to.
And I'm Greg Krojak. I write, well, it appears that I write short novels. They're not necessarily intended to be short novels when I start them, but I do write short novels. I've written 10 short novels. I've written 2 novellas and 1 short story. I live in Brazil, which is why I don't sound like I'm in the room next door to Adam. This is actually a special effect just to make it sound like I'm a long way away. Don't worry. I actually live next door. I started writing probably, what are we now, 2020? Probably about 7 years ago, but I didn't publish anything until 2015, I think. So I do have a couple of things that have been written. They're what I call my training wheels stories, because I didn't really know what I was doing then. You know, I was very new at it. I just knew that I wanted to write something. So I wrote a book. One day, perhaps it'll be published, probably not. But it was my learning novel. So hopefully I'm better now. I think it might be a good idea to explain the title of the episode as well, Breaking the Duck, for principally our American listeners. Most Brits will understand the expression, even if they're not a fan of the sport which it comes from, which is cricket. Cricket is that rather strange game that can take up to 5 days to complete a match. So breaking the duck refers to the batsman, the guy who is actually scoring runs. In cricket, a run is equal to a point. If he hasn't scored anything, he's been there for a while and he's on 0. If suddenly he manages to score a run, then he's said to have broken his duck. So that's basically it. It's the best title for the first episode, I think, because short is the new long, has broken its duck.
Greg, I thank you for inviting me to do this podcast with you, and I'm really excited about what we have got planned. We've already got several episodes in the making. So to those listening, they might be wondering, why is this called Short is the New Long? Why the name Short is the New Long?
Okay, well, some people may have heard, or may have seen rather, the TV series Orange is the New Black. That was them having a play on words about the expression is the new black, which is something from fashion, I believe. So, I don't know, polka dots could be the new black, that kind of idea.
I think gray is the new black.
Possibly. And I thought to myself, well, you see, first of all, the podcast has to have a title, of course. And I wanted it to be something hopefully witty. I don't know if you could call this title witty, but I did my best. But I suddenly had this idea, well, short stories are becoming more popular now. So instead of is the new black, how about is the new long? So it could be short as the new long. And I thought, that sounds really good. And I looked on the internet, and unfortunately, I wasn't the first person who thought of that. I found 2 articles on the internet, which were titled Short is the New Long. But as you know, you can't copyright titles, so there's no problem with me nicking it. So that is why it's called Short is the New Long, because short has kind of come into fashion. It's become much more popular now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a big call for that, especially as people are busier than ever before, especially as people commute and things like that. They like the shorter reads. So I guess now we've alluded to short stories, and that's mainly what I write, although I have some novellas in the works. But I mainly write short stories, and even the book that I have released, The Endless Summer, it's actually a fix-up. It's not a full novel by any stretch of the imagination, but it's novel length, and it's composed of a bunch of short stories that have been sort of blended and worked together with transition pieces. So for those listening out there, what exactly is a short read?
Well, like anything, there is dispute about what is what. But to me, a short read is something that is less it's 60,000 words, more or less. It may tip over a little bit, or less, because they say, whoever they say that a novel should be probably at least 80,000 words.
Right.
But a short read basically covers anything from microfiction, flash fiction, short story, novella, or a short novel. For an example, there's a famous, I don't think it's what you call a drabble, because a drabble is exactly 100 words as far as I understand. But there's a very famous 6-word short story, which people say is attributed to Ernest Hemingway. But apparently when this first idea came up, he was 10 years old. So unless it was like Mozart and a little genius, then he probably didn't actually create this story. But the story is basically for sale, baby shoes, never worn. That is 6 words, but that encompasses everything that is needed in a story. Because as long as you take the meaning of it, it's a very sad story. It's a tragedy. It hits an emotional spot, doesn't it? Right.
And I think that's the important thing, and we're going to talk in later episodes about what makes for a good short story. But I think a short story has to hit people emotionally quickly. And I think you and I both have the belief, I don't know if it's a mantra, but the belief that a story should be as long as it needs to be. No shorter, no longer. As long as it takes for you to tell that story that gets that emotional punch or that emotional response, that's how long it should be. And so trying to do that in 100 words or 1,000 words or 5,000 words or even 50,000 words, that's what makes a short read.
Yeah. I'm a great proponent of a story should be as long as it needs to be. I mean, I haven't written short stories or short novels on purpose. I mean, that sounds a bit mad because I did intend to write them, but I didn't
you intentionally wrote them.
I didn't intend them to be short novels.
Right.
When I start writing, often I don't know how long it's going to be. I don't know if I'm writing a short story, if I'm writing a novella, or if I'm writing a short novel. In fact, the short novels, usually I've started with the intention of writing a novel, in inverted commas. So it should, by standards, I suppose it should have 80,000 words or more.
Right.
But I don't pad my stories. I find that would be disingenuous to the story, to me writing it, but more importantly to the reader, because they don't want to be reading a story and think, oh, this is quite good, I'm quite enjoying this, and they suddenly get a load of fluff.
Right.
Just to reach a word target.
Just filler, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So, and that's actually what inspired me to think about creating this podcast, is because I suddenly thought to myself, well, all my stories are short. Even the novels are short. And then I did some research on the internet and found there wasn't much which was kind of aimed at the short read area, especially podcasts, because I did a search on the internet on my podcast provider or player or whatever you want to call it. I put in short stories, and all I got was lots of podcasts reading short stories. I think, in fact, 14 of the podcasts, their title was Short Stories. Very, very original, you know.
I was going to say not very witty.
Yeah. So there isn't actually a podcast like this for short stories. I mean, obviously we're going to overlap with people who write longer stuff.
Right.
Because we're still writing and they're still writing. But there are some things which are particular to short stories, or the shorter reads, should I say. Right.
And I think that, our writing style, yours and mine, it sort of, it naturally produces shorter fiction because we're both pantsers. And I can't imagine being a pantser and writing an 80, 90, or 100,000 word novel. I just think it'd be stream of consciousness or something, and that's a little bit too avant-garde for me. But I think it's good that short stories are becoming more popular, and I think part of it is for the same reason or the same way that we write, because we're pantsers. So an idea hits us, we sit down at the keyboard, and sometimes we might crank out an entire story just in one or a couple goes. And I remember when you were writing your WTF story. I remember, we were talking and you were just cranking it out. And oftentimes that's how it is. And I think that's really how a lot of people, not all people, but that's how a lot of people read these days. They pick something up and they just read it. And so you got to have something shorter. You got to have something to grab their attention. And so that's what this is for. So what's the purpose of this podcast? As we're recording these episodes and releasing these episodes, it's not just for us to talk about our writing. What are some of the ideas that are going to be taking place as we move through these episodes?
Yeah. So future episodes, as I said before, things will overlap with kind of regular sized novels, but some things are specific. For example, is it easy to write a short story? Some people may think it's easy to write a short story because what is a short story or what is a short read? It's a novel, but fewer words, yeah? So sounds obvious. But the thing is, it still needs to have form. It still needs to have structure. It still needs character development. Obviously, there could be less because there are fewer words.
And I will say, just because it's a short story doesn't mean that it doesn't need all of those elements that a longer story does. If it's a 4,000 word short story that's filled with flat characters, nobody's going to want to read it. There's still going to have to be character development. They're going to have to be believable characters. You still have to have the round characters. You still have to have some semblance of plot, atmosphere, and that's no different than a longer story. The only difference really is length. You have a shorter amount of time to build all that stuff. If you're working towards tension, you have shorter amounts of time to build the tension. You have shorter amounts of time to release that tension. And I think in many ways that can make writing short fiction difficult because you have to do everything that longer fiction does, just in a much more concise amount of words.
Yeah, it's a question of economy.
Yes.
Economy. You still need all the elements, but as you just said, in a shorter space. And some people can do it, some people can't.
Right.
I seem to gravitate naturally towards that. It's not, as I said before, it's not a conscious decision to write shorter novels. But some people have to work at it. For me, I think I'd probably have to be like the opposite. I'd have to work towards writing something longer.
Yeah.
So other episodes will be, there's an episode coming up which will be dealing with Kindle short reads, because Kindle actually have a section which they call short reads. There are some rules about how you can come under that category. They also have Kindle singles, which unfortunately is not for us, and I'll explain to you why in the future episode. Kindle singles, the idea is short stories. Kindle short reads can be short novels, but Kindle singles are actually just short stories.
Mm. So, Greg, now this is not just a podcast for us to talk about our writing. This is not just a podcast for writers, because we're going to have guests, we're going to have interviewees. This is not just a podcast for writers to talk about themselves either. We also want to engage readers. And how are we going to do that?
We're going to ask for readings by the actual authors themselves, excerpts from their work. Because I think that if you hear an author reading his own work, it does add a little something special to it. Could be that the professional narrator actually has a better voice, but that can't be helped. We all have the voice that we're given.
Well, the very first author, the very first author that we brought on, other than ourselves, he has a wonderful voice. He could be a narrator, and I am so jealous, but I don't want to play our hand too soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm excited for that portion of the authors reading their own works. So this is really a way for authors of short stories and readers of short stories to connect on a podcast and to interact in some way, shape, or form. The readers can tell us what they like reading, and the writers can listen, but also tell us what they like writing. And it's a way for both groups to interact with one another that really isn't out there in the podcast world right now.
So, Adam, explain what a pantser and a plotter is. Because the writers will know, obviously, but the listeners probably won't.
Yes, well, so if you're a pantser, that means you get an idea and you just sit down and write. And of course, some pantsers probably don't even get an idea. They just sit down and write and start doing, clickety-clack stuff on the keyboards and say whatever. Now, that's not how I do it. I actually, when I sort of get the muse to write, I don't have a short story in mind. I actually have what I call the hook, which is the very last bit. And that's how all my stories start. My brain comes up with this idea that says, wouldn't this be a freaky thing to happen? Or wouldn't this be something outlandish? Or wouldn't this be terrifying? And that's the hook. And that's usually what comes at the end of my stories. And so when I'm ready to write that down, I sit down on my computer and I say, okay, so who are the characters? And I usually write a character or a setting, and that's the beginning. And then it's up to my muse to get me from the beginning to the end. And I have no idea how that's going to happen. Sometimes my characters surprise me. Sometimes things happen in the stories that I'm like, wow, where did that come from? And sometimes it's just amazing, the journey from the beginning to the end of how I get there. And that's what a pantser is. You type by the seat of your pants. You don't have a plan.
Yeah.
And then you have a plotter. And plotters plan everything out. They usually have storyboards and flowcharts and dry erase boards, and they have actual plot. They might write out the scenes and have all the scenes planned and things like that. And so it's very much a controlled process. It's very much, this is going to happen here, this is going to happen here, this is going to happen here. And then by the time they sit down to write, basically all they're doing is filling in words for those things that happen. I actually have a lot of respect for people like that because I can't do it. I mean, I could try, but I don't think that I do very good.
I can't do it either. I suppose I'm a pantser, but maybe a little bit of hybrid, because I get to a point towards the end of the story and I think, I better kind of organize myself now. Otherwise, I'm going to be wandering off at tangents.
You need to tie up the loose ends. And of course, you write a bit longer than I do. So you sort of need to do that. You can't just leave a bunch of loose ends dangling. If I do that in a short story of 3,000 words, I can say, well, it's just a literary device to leave you unfulfilled. Yes. But if someone's reading a 40, 50, 60,000 word book and they come to the end and just all these loose ends are just dangling there with absolutely no resolution, they're gonna feel jilted or slighted. So or you don't have quite as much freedom there as I do.
Or you have to write another one, for example.
That's right, like the Soft Trilogy, right?
Well, I was thinking more. Yes, the Soft Trilogy. The Girl with Acrylic Eyes, the first book, was actually intended to be a standalone, and there is a loose end at the end of that. And if anybody doesn't realise, they're reading it and they suddenly think, I think the author forgot something here. What's this bit about? Yeah. And it was kind of deliberate because my plan was to write a short story, kind of explaining that part of it. But then another author, Eric Wickland, he said to me, Coppelia is the android. He said, Coppelia is kind of like Adam and Eve is to us. Coppelia is to androids.
Right.
And that got me thinking. And I actually ended up writing 2 more books.
Yeah. You got a trilogy out of it. So, yeah.
Yes, I got a trilogy out of it. Totally.
And a very good one.
Unplanned at the beginning. But the thing is that then I was able to resolve, if somebody reads the second book, then they understand the loose end, in inverted commas, in the first book. And then in the second book, there's another thing which is a bit curious, and that's explained in the third book. So I suppose if I put them all together, that I have a long novel. It's about 145,000 words.
Right.
They each have kind of separate sections, natural limits. So they're still short reads. The longest is 60,000 words, I think, and then it goes down to maybe 45.
Right. So, Greg, I'm really excited to explore more about short writing and short reading. So if other people out there are excited about this topic, how do they get involved with this podcast?
Well, if they go to the Anchor FM, our podcast host's website, all these details will be in the show notes. There's actually a rather funky button there which says leave a voice message, so they can leave even if they have a comment on the podcast about something we've talked about, then they can send a message through that. So then, and
we want to incorporate those messages too. As people are leaving messages, we want to respond to those.
Oh, definitely, because the podcast is intended to be interactive. It's not a lecture; it's a conversation between us and the listeners. So, for example, authors and listeners, if they want to get in touch with us, they can do it that way. They can send an email to sitnl@hotmail.com, or they can go to our website, which would be fun anyway for us, well, and for them, hopefully, because it's got a lot more information about the podcast and why it exists, etc., etc. And you can also listen to the podcast from the website. So that website address is sitnl4.wixsite, that's wixsite.com/SITNL podcast. The last part after the slash is all one word. Of course, if they're on Facebook, they can send us a private message as well.
I'm really excited, and we have some good lineups going on, and we have a great author who's already read an excerpt from his book that we're going to share soon, and we're going to be reading excerpts from our books, and I just look forward to what this podcast holds for the future, and I look forward to hearing from our listeners, whether they are writers or readers, and hearing why they enjoy short fiction.
So thanks for listening, everybody, and I hope you'll join us again next Tuesday. In between the main episodes, there will be bonus episodes, which will mainly be readings, author readings, but also, as we said earlier, if the listeners send in something that they'd like to tell people about, that's where you'll find those as well.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll be back next Tuesday.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to Short is the New Long. Be sure to subscribe to get the latest episodes updated every Tuesday.